Hi, leave you here. So I was just going out the door for a walk and to have a coffee somewhere. And this idea came up that I wanted to share briefly. And it's an idea about security, about financial security. Because you see, I was, after I made the first video, the previous video that you may have just seen on the channel, I remembered a conversation I had with a reader of my spiritual memoir. So some years ago, maybe like 5 years ago, in 2020, I wrote a spiritual memoir, which it's actually this book that I have on my desk. It's called If I Knew I Wouldn't Worry. And it really means that if I knew that life takes care of itself, I wouldn't worry about how things will turn out, how the current problems in my life will actually take care of themselves. So if I knew that they would take care of themselves, as other problems in the past have done, then I wouldn't worry, right? So I wrote this book a few years ago, and it's a story about my experience with my previous partner in California, in Napa Valley, where we moved there. And a lot of different circumstances took care of themselves. We found the perfect house, we found the perfect car. I ended up making the money that I needed in a very beautiful, joyful way. So a lot of these typical problems that you have when you move to a new country actually took care of themselves. So it became a beautiful example and story for how life does take care of themselves. And this story is actually the story of when I was learning to trust life and experimenting with this idea that maybe life is trustworthy and maybe I can surrender to it. And in fact, I can trust it so much that I can follow my joy. That life is that trustworthy and life is that intelligent that it wants us to trust it, and it wants us to not function from fear, from insecurity. And actually, when you get the fear out of the way, what remains is what you feel like doing, so your joy remains. Anyway, I've said a lot of things in just this few seconds, this few minutes, but the reason I'm shooting the video is because one of the readers, I recently published this book, because it's funny, I wrote the book 5 years ago and I didn't want to force the publishing process, so I just let it stay there and see if it actually has a life, if it has a destiny, and if it's meant to go into the world. So apparently a few months ago I felt the impulse to publish the book. I wanted to see the book on my desk, so I just went on Amazon and in a few hours the book was published. So it happened naturally by itself, beautifully so. I had all the ingredients, I had the cover, I had the manuscript, I had everything ready, which kind of came along throughout the years. When I had the impulse to design the cover, for example, or proofread the book. So the book got published, and a recent reader reached out after he read the book, and apparently he loved it, and he resonated with a lot of these ideas shared in the book. Things like life's intelligence, like alignment, like following your joy, and not doing things you don't feel like doing. So he resonated with a lot of the ideas and reached out for a conversation, which we had, and it was lovely. So in the conversation I had with this person, what came up was this idea about security and financial security. Because you see, we were talking about how money and security is not actually something external, but it's something that is internal. So security is an awareness that we have about life's ability to deliver the right resources and to inspire us and to move us and to guide us. So most people think that security is external. It's in my bank account, it's in the amount of money that I have or that I will receive as a salary, or could be for my investments or whatever it is. We think of security as an external thing, and what I ended up sharing with this guy who kind of really appreciated this idea, and I wanted to share it with you as well in this video, is that security is not the presence of external security, but it's the absence of internal insecurity. So most of us, we go after security, financially speaking, in this case, because the finances are one of the most common and flexible and solvent, I think that's the word, the most accessible forms of security in this world, because we can exchange it for other forms of security. And what we were talking about and what I was sharing is that actually it's not about going after security externally. The true security is in having a clear understanding of life, which removes the internal insecurity. So it's not about the presence of wealth, it's about the absence of fear inside of us. That's true security. And how do we know that insecurity doesn't have to be inside of us? Well, it's when you study spirituality, when you reflect on life, when you look at different people's stories, when you hear people's stories as well, and they share how life has taken care of them throughout the years when they were surrendering to it. And then when you look at your own life and you see that opportunities appeared, resources appeared, and generally speaking, we think we made those happen, but actually they were always lined up, you could say. So you begin to observe that life has a generous flow to itself. And when you recognize this generosity of life, that's when insecurity begins to diminish, even to a point of dissolving completely. So, all this to say that financial security is an internal awareness, not an external amount. And when you discover life's generosity, it begins to diminish, and we don't have to go around in the world looking for that external security, and actually function in the world from a place of internal security, which is the awareness of life's generosity. And actually, when people do run around trying to make a lot of money, it's because that drive is driven by internal insecurity about money. So they're trying to compensate for that insecurity externally with external amounts of money, because you could say the ego is still very dense and it still feels very much in charge, and it does not understand the spiritual context in which it exists, and that this spiritual context, you could say life's generosity or life's intelligence, knows how to take care of itself. But eventually we grow spiritually to a point where the ego is not as dense, so it begins to observe the flow, to observe the intelligence of life, and learn to surrender. And when that happens, our insecurity begins to diminish, and we begin to observe that life does take care of itself, that life does deliver the right resources for our well-being and for us to fulfill our destiny or our role here in the world. So we stop functioning in search of security externally, financially wise, and not only, and we start to function from a place of security, right? Which means that if we're not insecure, we're going to do what feels right. Just think about it. Like, if you don't have to do anything, what will you do? And generally speaking, the answer is you will do what you feel like doing. You will follow your joy. Your natural creative nature will take over. Your configuration will take over. And you could say life will use you in the best way that is aligned for you, also in the most synchronistic way, and will also deliver the right resources for the journey, as I've personally experienced throughout this past 5-6 years as well. So this being said, hope you enjoyed it, and I'm gonna go on my walk and have my coffee. Cheers.